Hello, I'm Zorvix, and this is a series of videos I'm going to be calling Bolt Action by the Numbers, where I review some of the World Team Championship list information. All images in these presentations are owned by Warlord Games. To preface this information, we do need to understand what kind of format this was. There were 1,000 requisition points, only generic reinforced platoons, and then units from the errata and the armies of book were used. That does place quite a bit of limitation on what is available. However, this information can be great for utilizing as a basis for what is good for each of the countries. So it's kind of a standard base rate. Excluded from this review were the lists that were in the team known as World. This was kind of a pickup group among some of the alternates and other people that could go in order to fill one of the slots from the teams that could come. Additionally, the alternate lists that were not played were not part of this analysis. There were 11 teams being reviewed. Each team could bring 5 lists, but one of those lists was dropped. So there were 4 lists being played. Consequently, this means there were 44 lists being evaluated. Of note, there may be potential human error, problems with the list. There were a couple discrepancies here and there, but the information overall should be fairly accurate. As for the platoon distributions, there were 18 single platoons, 24 double platoons, and only 2 triple platoons were actually played. There were some lists that were over 3 platoons. However, none of those were actually part of the criteria that we just discussed. This does seem to indicate a high reliance on those double platoons, especially for maybe some of those horde armies and higher dice count armies. But single platoons did have a pretty good representation in this kind of limited format. There were 9 British lists, and the reason there's an asterisk there is I did include the Australian list as a British colony in that number. So 8 plus Australians. Similarly, there were 8 German, 8 Japanese, and 8 Soviets. So those big 4 were definitely equally represented throughout the teams that were attending. There were 5 US, 3 Polish, 2 French, and 1 Chinese list that performed quite well, actually. Interestingly enough, there were 3 teams that brought Finnish lists. However, none of them were played. They were all part of the alternates, kind of as a scare tactic. A lot of people say that Finnish is good on paper, but it takes the right player or don't perform nearly as well as they feel they should. As for the order dice, there was a substantial number. Overall, 14.84 average. This is pretty phenomenal considering that it is only 1,000 points. And a lot of people say the minimum you should be bringing is, 1 die per 100 points. So this is getting to be considerable more than that, almost 50%. The 2 highest lists were 21 order dice. There was a Soviet and a Japanese list. One of them came in at 9th and 12th, respectively. The 2 lowest lists, so there was a 9 order dice British list and a 10 for Soviets. Again, 43rd and 34th, respectively. This is a pretty good empirical evidence that there's some sweet spot up in the higher number of order dice, which can give you that good value at an event. This does also conversely state that if you're running one of those lower dice limits, you're going to struggle a little bit more. Get some of the dice that have more, or some of the lists that have more order dice, a little bit more control. The Chinese did come out on top with 17 order dice. This is a rather small pool at only 1 list, so it is a little skewed. Coming in second is going to be the Japanese. Kind of no surprise, 16.4. This is considered one of the horde armies. And then pretty much tied for third is the Soviets at 15.3 and US at 15.4. Interesting, considering the Soviets are also considered one of the horde armies, and the US are not, and tend to rely more on some veterans. So they're going to be using more teams, more combined arms typically, and we'll take a look at those in part 2, where I'll discuss some of the unit choices. Following that is going to be the Germans at 14.3, and then the French, Polish, British down at the bottom, ranging from 13 to 14. As I mentioned in part 2, I'll talk about some of the unit choices that were being made. Part 3, I'll cover some of the nation-specific information. I do look forward to doing those videos and hearing what you have to say. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.